Welcome to the One Point Podcast, and I'm Rohit Yadav. And today we are diving into the world where science fiction is becoming reality, the explosive rise of robotic startups. From industrial guidance to warehouse automation to healthcare, agriculture, and to autonomous delivery, robots are revolutionizing industries at a breakneck pace. The startup innovators aren't just building machines, they are reshaping how we work, produce, and live. We'll uncover what's driving this robotic revolution, the startups leading the charge, the funding fueling their growth, and the challenges around this ecosystem today. Whether you are an investor, a tech enthusiast, or a curious person who wants to know more about robotics, this episode is packed with insights for you. The future is coming. It's now, it's here. And to discuss this amazing topic, I have an excellent guest with me, Albane from Inbolt, who is pushing the boundaries on robotics. So thanks, Albane, for joining in.
Thanks for having me.
Albane is in charge of the sales and operations team at Inbolt. Right now, she's based in the US. So it's an interesting shift. And we would love to capture more on this, on why did she decide to move to the US. She worked in the M&A and strategy consulting in Goldman Sachs, Lazard, and Roland Berger before launching Inbolt. And fun fact about her is that she had signed an offer to work full time at Goldman Sachs in London in the industrial M&A team before she met her current associates. So let's see how her journey has unfolded in Inbolt and what Inbolt is building. So welcome to the podcast, and I will hand it over to you if you can introduce what Inbolt is really all about and where did the motivation come from building Inbolt.
Yeah. So, in short, what we're doing at Inbolt is we're providing eyes and the brain to industrial robots. Our product is software based and we're experts in 3D vision and AI. So, we're very good at locating an object that the robot needs to work on and then adapting the robot trajectory in real time so that the robot can work on that object with
Okay.
good precision, good repeatability.
Okay. And how has the journey been? So what's the future vision from now on? From here on, like how would you project journey of 3 to 5 years down the line?
So when you think about automation right now, and I would say more than 60% of the installed robot base are, especially in the automotive and electronics industries. Almost none of these robots have a vision system guiding them, right?
Okay.
So usually when you want to automate, you change the production line, you change the environment to make it suited to robots. But this is extremely expensive, adding jigs, indexing systems, constraining fixtures to make sure that everything is always perfect.
Hmm.
That's not real life. That's expensive, that's time consuming. What we're saying at Inbolt is that instead of thinking this way when it comes to automation, making sure that the environment adapts to the robot, why not having the robot adapting to the environment? So
Okay.
instead of making vision guided robotics the exception when you can't solve automation challenges by putting mechanical indexing systems, we want people to think about putting a camera on their robot by default to guide the robot to see the environment.
Okay.
So today, I would say if we're lucky, 1 out of 10 robots has a vision system. I think tomorrow we want to do 10 out of 10.
Wow. Great vision. And so within this vision, explain to us your move to the US. How did that happen?
Well, so we're based in Paris, in France. This is where the headquarters are, and we have been starting to work with into the automotive industry. So our first customers, one of them is Stellantis, which is a global OEM. So they're manufacturing cars, and they have plants all over Europe, but also in the US since the acquisition of the fusion
Hmm.
with Chrysler. So very naturally, as the collaboration with Stellantis was getting stronger, they also asked us to go to the US to support their American factories. And this is what we've been doing. And so far, it's been very successful.
Okay.
So we need to be there to support them locally.
So it's more about extending the sales and going where the demand is, right?
So this is how it started. Yes. So we were pushed by a customer. So we knew where we landed. But
Okay.
also when it comes to speed of automation, speed of decision making, from what we're seeing is that the US goes a bit faster than in Europe. That's for
Okay.
sure. So this is definitely for us as 2025, we have huge sales objectives. This is why the US is a great stepping stone.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's zoom out a bit and focus on the general robotics sector. How have the last 3 years been? There has been a massive boom in robotics funding. Obviously, you're well aware of it. If you can explain to the audience what has happened in the last years which has made this excitement possible, all this startups coming up, funding going in, and so on.
Yeah, so you have to, I would say, divide robotics in two different categories, which is the categories that customers who didn't have robots before and the customers who had robots and have been having robots for the past 30 years. I would say these two categories currently have the same hype for AI and vision system to make robots smarter. This is something that the past few years you could just didn't see at all. It was more like AI was a banned word in factories. Vision system was used only when you couldn't do without them. So we're definitely seeing a trend to that. I think you also have to see now that people have really especially in the Western countries, labor shortage. They're trying to find ways to automate tasks that were impossible or too complex to automate before, and that's where AI and vision systems are coming into. And that's why you're seeing this huge boom in robotics, because robotics is just not hardware anymore. It's just software and technology. And then, of course, so there is this traditional robots, the what we call 6-axis robots, 2-axis robots, the robots that you see in the factories, but also the humanoid robots. And these have been driving the trend and a massive share of the funding recently.
So to continue the conversation, there is two sides to this, right? So there is the hardware side and the software side. Do you think that because of AI, the software side has picked up tremendously? And how has this impacted the robotics sector?
Yeah, so the software side, there are two different things when it comes to software for robotics. There is the control software, so the orders that gives the robot which joint to move, in which direction, which time, and to go where. And there is a perception side, which is what is around the robot, locating, identifying the task, the object on which the robot has to perform a task. So there is two things: motion control and perception and navigation. And I would say AI in both fields has tremendously increased and improved the way people can work with these robots. Before that, it was extremely complex to be able to have robots evolve in what we call unconstrained environment or unplanned environment, which is the environment in which we live, both of us, every day, right? So a cup of tea that I'm going to pick out of the table, it can be anywhere on the table, and I'm never going to pick it the same way.
Yep.
But the task ultimately is going to be the same, right? So it's a combination of both navigation and perception, control and perception. And right now, with what we're seeing in the technology out there, is that you can have super easy model that will help you while controlling your robot, or actually just by giving the robot the task to accomplish, the robot will be itself able to generate a path, the optimal path to go to that object or to do that task, and also to analyze without so much input the environment around it so that it can adapt its trajectory.
Okay. And are you feeling this kind of excitement within the ecosystem, especially within the fundraising investor ecosystem, that they are pushing more capital towards robotic startups? And if so, what has unlocked this in general? And the second part to the same question would be, if you have to rank or choose, different sectors within robotics, like subsectors, where's the maximum capital going in?
Yeah, so we've definitely, I mean, it's hard not to read that, right? Whether it's in the news or in LinkedIn, of course, you see funding that are really coming through every day. And that's really great news. I think what we're seeing is that investors are less risk adverse because they know the potential that robotics can bring in the future and how accessible it has become to the future end user, right? So we're definitely seeing that also customers are happy to buy innovative system, which is once again more sales, means more more investment from the investors. I would say that right now, well, in the past months, where we've seen the most investments. So a few years ago, it was in warehouse automation with companies like Covariant, for instance.
Okay.
Right now, we're seeing a lot of investment in, I would say, humanoid robotics. That's something that is still continuing, and I don't know what is the next wave, but hopefully it will be us.
Okay, fingers crossed. What's driving the humanoid investments in this space overall? So I'm very curious. Do the investors really think that it will be humanoids will replace the house help? It will be able to support humans working on smaller tasks and so on? And why this category first? Is this they want to capture the enthusiasm of people who is just fascinated by what's happening out there? Or is it like they are more trying to capture the enthusiasm of corporates and industrial worker systems and so on?
There is definitely two different types of publics or end users for humanoid robotics. So you have on one side the industries, the manufacturing industries, which
Mhm.
traditionally have been using static robots, so robot who which don't move from the floor.
Mhm.
And you see service robotics, right? Where you have hospitals, restaurants, household like us. In both of these cases, what humanoids are helping is that previously robots were either not moving, so only doing one task from one place to another. So having a moving robot could really increase the flexibility of such plants, and that's really great. On the other side, when it comes to service industry, it's more like of labor workers, and there is of course a lot of tasks that could be automated because they have not that much value to add, and that's why humanoid robotics could be a huge improvement. In both cases, we had robots before. I mean, six-axis robots on that side. And in the service industry, we more had like AMR or AGVs, carrying, I would say, in hospitals, carrying like medicine from door to
Mhm.
door. But both of these systems lack the extra mile, which one of them is having the robot walk, the other one is having the robots do more dexterous things.
What's really interesting for me is like how the retail side, the people side, the customer side of this will evolve, and how will the adoption be, and if there's central some figure who will push the narrative on usage of humanoids in the daily life, probably it might happen much more easier within the customer space, and it might happen earlier. Let's see.
Yeah, I think it all depends on the use case, right? I
Yeah.
would say you see the first autonomous robots that we have used are robots that are going to clean our homes, right? So this is what we already have right now, and we also have autonomous robots for in the garden, right?
Yeah.
To For the grass cutting. So we already have that. We're already willing to pay. It's just about the use case.
Okay. Do you see from an ecosystem, again, we are talking about the ecosystem level, the larger ecosystem, robotics as a field in general, there's a more push in the US or in Europe right now? Where do you see the maximum push coming from? Fundraising, from the hype, from the number of startups coming up, and so on?
From what we're seeing, the biggest numbers are in the US, of course, when it comes to amount and just the sum of the fundings in
Mhm.
general, and the number of new startups that we see, the number of successful startup in robotics also. I would say it's more leaning towards the US, but it's always been that way when it comes to startups in
Fundraising, yeah.
general. Also because robotics is extremely capital intensive. So there's a lot of R&D. The
True.
sales cycle time are long. Also, if you work in the manufacturing industry, hence the need for a lot of money. We do have some great talents though in Europe and some great customers too. So Europe is also a very strong market for robotics. People have been investing in robotics, at least in manufacturing, for a
Mhm.
long time, and they will continue to do so in the coming years.
Definitely. I think, especially with respect to when it comes to manufacturing, industrial kind of robotics application and so on, I think Europe has such a tremendous pull in usage and adaptability in this case that I see a brighter future within
Yeah,
European ecosystem as well,
for sure.
definitely. So let's change gears and talk much more about your fundraising journey, because
Mhm.
this is a very interesting topic for the ecosystem. Everyone wants to understand how did you raise successfully as a startup, as a robotic startup, because it's not easy. As you said, it's a capital intensive endeavor, and obviously not everyone is interested to invest in these kind of startups. So while every startup's journey is unique, maybe covering your journey from your perspective and how you went about it helps other founders to grow their startups, right? And within this flow, maybe you can just explain where do you stand overall, how many rounds you have raised, if you can tell some numbers around it and so on.
So yeah, for sure. So our last fundraising was a Series A of 15 million. The Series A was led by Exer, which is an venture capital based out of Europe, with also offices in the States. So I would say what made the difference during our fundraising
Mhm.
effort was our very strong focus on the customers. Because when you talk about robotics, people have the idea that you're just developing a new technology and that maybe in 5 to 10 years it's going to have customers, right? Um, what we did was different in the way that we've always, from the get-go, really focused on the end customer and showing the value of what we've developed to a specific kind of market, specific type of use case. And we had the right metrics to not only say, look, we have this great technology, but we
Okay.
also have this great pool of customers who are validating it. So it's just not a moonshot.
Okay, so I want to pick up on what you said right now. How did you enable this customer adoption for your startup? How
Yeah,
did you
well,
unlock?
yeah, of course. So it was about, well, first of all, we've always been very sales-driven company. So
Mhm.
we are targeting customers, like reaching out to customers proactively. We have great penetration within certain key accounts that we have identified.
Okay.
And it was all about finding the more time you spend with a customer, the more time you understand their need and you can categorize them into specific standard use cases, which we have done. And we identified that for certain use cases, our product brought the most value to customers. And then we
Mhm.
chose some specific ones and we went straight to production, not to stay with proof of concept, but really with production.
Okay, so let's track back your journey. So you mentioned your Series A, right, which happened last year. Correct me if I'm wrong. How about the seed and before seed kind of fundraising? How did you go about those topics? And during the very initial funding, were you dependent on some kind of grants? How did you manage that? How did you, from zero to one, right?
Yeah, that's true. And we've been at it for the past 5 years. So we do now have a bit of experience in that. So we did a 3 million seed round led by Mig. I think it was back in 2021. So Mig invested thanks to the technology that we were developing at the time. They thought it was a great advancement. We were working on a different application of that technology at that time, not
Okay.
in robotics, and we pivoted after that seed round into robotics. Still, it was the same technology, which is real-time robot guidance based out of AI and 3D vision.
And how did this pivot come about? So I'm going to
Yeah.
scratch the surface and kind
Yeah.
of peel the different layers to
Mhm.
help audience understand, because all what you have gone through, I think all the startups go through the same kind of topics,
Mhm.
but it just helps them to understand, hey, you know what? Inbolt also did a pivot somehow, and they managed to do very good afterwards. So maybe you can tell the audience about your pivot journey.
Yeah, so the initial idea behind Inbolt was to improve the reliability and traceability of workers' work on the shop floor.
Okay.
So instead of putting our camera system and guidance system on robot arms as we do it now,
Mhm.
we put our camera and algorithm onto the manual tools of the workers, like drills, torque
Yeah.
wrenches, all this kind of, not runners, all these kind of things. Now imagine it like a GoPro, but for tools, right? And we were able to track and locate in real time what they were doing to really guarantee the quality of their operations.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of our customers at the time were in the automotive industry,
Okay.
and basically just by hearing about them, hearing about the investment they were going to make, we saw that the trend was really into robotics. And so after raising the seed round, we discussed all together and we're like, if we really want to be, because we have the ambition to go high, right? We're
Yeah.
not here just to stick with that same technology and see if it's going to work. We're here to solve the biggest problem we can find, and that wasn't the biggest problem we could solve. The biggest problem was to enable automation at a lower cost and easier for the end customer. And we knew that with the technology that we had,
Hmm.
which is a real-time part position localization technology to guide then either a worker or robot, we could help our customers make automation easier. So we used that same pool of customers at the
Got it.
time to go into robotics.
Got it. So you kind of implemented one use case and you realize there's an even bigger opportunity that we can capture, and that could kind of entice the customers to like uh, maybe work with you much more and adopt your technology much more. And I can bet investors also love that, right? So investors always loved bigger things, bigger TAMs and so on.
Yes. And it was also, spending enough time in the shop floor. We started the company straight out of university.
Wow.
None of us had spent years doing factory visits or working in the plant, right? But as we understood more about the customers, about the manufacturing industry, we also identified the real problems. So we
Hmm.
had to pivot because the real problem wasn't where we thought it was somewhere else.
Got it. Amazing point mentioned. So now I want to scratch the surface of your fundraising. So you said seed, you said Series A.
Yeah.
There must be a lot of rejections on the way. Tell us all about it.
What can I
Or
say?
you got the first investor check as it is. Maybe
It
that's what
no,
happens.
no, never. What people say is true. It takes one yes. This
Okay.
is what is the most important. So of course, along the way, the goal for is always to do volume, right? I mean, not
Mhm.
every VC wants to invest in robotics, especially robotics for the manufacturing industry or
Yeah.
robotics with deep tech, because we do a lot of AI and R&D. We had to find the right investors, and they
Mhm.
had to be convinced about, first of all, the team. That was especially the case for the seed, and for the Series A, the team and the market potential.
Okay. So, is there some numbers that you can share? And if you don't want to, then please don't. That how many you tried, let's say you tried to talk to 20 investors first and it converted into, let's say, 5 meetings, and from that 5 meetings, like one seeded. So do you have some kind of that you can share with the audience so that they understand what it really takes?
Yeah, so for the Series A, I don't have the exact numbers in head.
Okay.
I know that we discussed with, I think, more than 20 investors. In the end, those who stick, I think we had, yes, 6 to 5 investors with which we had more advanced discussions, and in the end it was more 2, 3, and then there's a final one who sent the term sheet out.
Okay. So within this, I want to capture 2 points. One, what was the reason of rejection from the investors who didn't invest with you? I mean, maybe many of them said that it doesn't fit their investment thesis, but
Mhm.
was there some other reason?
No, I think it was just about the investment is definitely a big thing. And it's
Mhm.
also about, as we discuss with more and more investors, you know how to adapt your pitch, right? So what they're going to be looking for. So with the first investors, we're like, we have this great use case that we're going to scale in the factories and then replicate. And then we realized soon enough that to really what expect was investors are looking for in the model that we were showing them was the land and expand potential of Inbolt. Is when you sell one system to one customer on one use case, it's
Mhm.
never going to stay the way that's the same. You're going to have a great expansion. If you sell one system, you can sell 20 more every year in the same plant.
Okay.
And that's really the narrative that we built as we were fundraising that really stick and made the difference to the fundraising.
Got it. So this narrative of scalability of sales, I think this hit a jackpot, so to say, right?
Yes. And it depends on your customer, right? But if you talk to enterprise, or if
Mhm.
you talk about, manufacturing, like we do enterprise sales, you have to talk about scalability within the account because it's so hard to get that account into. Once you break into it, the stickiness is huge. So if you can't bank on that stickiness, then it's going to be a problem because it's too much effort for nothing. So
Okay.
scalability is super important.
Yes, sure. I want to take one step back and ask you this question of how did you find your first customers? Because typically what happens is, and hear me out, there are a lot of founders, let's say, who are experienced within the field and they have pre-built connections within their past companies where they worked, area of work, XYZ. So there's kind of the network they bring in. But you guys have a different kind of trajectory altogether. As you said, you guys started just out of the university. So who got this connections with the customers? Why did the first customer bought this idea from you and had have you on their shop floors or have you worked on these kind of technologies and so on?
Yeah, I think how we found our first customers, LinkedIn,
Okay.
emailing. We're just relentless. We just reach out to people all the time, all
Hustle.
the time.
Okay. So it's sheer hustle. Good. Apart from, I mean, fundraising is always tricky for all the startups, and specifically in the last couple of years have been difficult. Apart from fundraising, did you face some other fundraising challenges that, for example, you didn't have the right viewpoint on how to build the decks or how to pitch your startup, or it could be anything, apart from fundraising, like what do you think are the top couple of challenges that you faced during fundraising?
During fundraising, I think honestly, we were very lucky to have a great board that really carried us and made a lot of great intros during that fundraising. I think ultimately fundraising, if you already have done a seed for the Series A and Series B, is going to be about the intros that the people around you are able to make because a warm intro is better than anything else. It's pre-vetted in a way. So we didn't have any challenge with that. And no, I would say it's about, making the narrative better and better after each rejection
Mm-hmm.
and not taking it personally, because if they didn't believe into your narrative this time, then you have to make sure that the other one is going to believe it. The deck, from our experience, the deck needs to have the right narrative also built into it. But it was fine as it is. We didn't have that too much feedback on that. It's really about building the story. I think being super, in France we say that being very American, but having the American spirit and
Mindset. Okay.
exactly to really say like you're aiming for something big, to showcase
Mhm.
your ambition. It's not to be afraid of that is really important.
Okay. Did you have some kind of sessions with advisors, consultants, so to say, mentors, and what was their role in your journey? Like I'm talking about even before seed,
Mhm.
even before raising the seed round.
Yes, we've always been careful about surrounding ourselves with people who can advise us. One of our first mentor was Richard Green, the former CEO and and founder of Ubisense, which is a company selling to the manufacturing the industrial OEMs. His first advice was always to focus on the customer first.
Okay.
So we've been really, really biased in that way to always focus on the customer first, which also is something that really transpired in our decks and then in the narrative that we had for every stage of the fundraisings.
Okay. So can you say that your secret sauce was being customer focused? When you talk about secret sauce, it can always be in one or two areas. For example, some people focus on technology, it's radically different technology.
Mhm.
Some people focus on product, some people focus on design, some people focus, say their secret sauce is distribution or connections to the enterprise and so on. So your secret sauce would have, if I'm getting it right, like it's really this focus on customers, what they want. As you mentioned earlier in the
Yes.
podcast.
Yes. I think we have been relentlessly customer focused, which drives everything else, right? The product that you're building. I mean, the technology, we have a great technology. We spent 5 years doing R&D. Technology never really lasts. So you have to keep on building that. But to know in which direction you need to go, you need to know what your customers want
Mhm.
to buy. So yes, definitely always knowing that we don't know and keeping on asking questions to the customers. And it's really hard to say that we don't know.
Yes, it's not easy to accept that. What was the role of grants, and did you take any grants in general? Because it acts as a very building step for a lot of startups, specifically the ones which require huge amounts of capital right in the beginning, and a lot of investors are not ready to put in that capital. Did you take grants? How did you go about this journey of grant funding, so to say? For a lot of startup founders, it's not easy because you have to write applications and so on. So, if you can explain a bit more about that.
We have had a lot of grants. We are extremely lucky to be French and to be based here with our headquarters. So the French startup ecosystem has been extremely supportive, and we have an investment vehicle named the BPI that for deep tech R&D startup like ours has a lot of grants available.
Okay. And did you take the help of startup grant consultants or something in general, or did you write your own applications?
So my co-founder Rudy has been very good at this. He's
Okay.
been the one mastering all the grants and getting the money that we needed in between the fundings. So I would say it has definitely become one of his strong skills. And we've been helped by consultants, of course, to know exactly where to go. And I think also for the European fundings, which is also a big thing, you can be helped by consultants, which is also very helpful.
Okay. So overall, you would say the ecosystem is quite efficient and transparent for you as a founder. It has been that you were able to kind of get all those grants, apply for those grants, get the kind of information of whatever was required when it was required.
Yes, I mean, definitely, you need to hear about the existence of these grants, either from other founders who know about it, but we've been in a deep tech incubator from the very start, an incubator that is based in Paris, that is very famous for deep tech startups. So a
Okay.
lot of the other startups around us were doing the same things. So that was great to know where to go.
Uh,
And yes, and then in the end, it was about asking just online, everything is available. We just needed to take the time to do it, right? And that's the
okay.
advantage with being three co-founders is one of us has been able to take the time to work on that.
Yeah, that's what I always hear, that one of the founder is always like really focused. Some of them are actually coming from the PhD background, so they know how to, write it academically, all
Mhm.
those applications, and it really helps, obviously. Do you think communities, because you mentioned you were part of an incubator in Paris, which is pretty popular for the tech scene, do you think those communities, being part of those communities, getting the answers for questions that probably you don't have or you don't understand. It really helps. And would you encourage founders to, just relentlessly be part of such communities and ask and ask and ask?
Yes, to a certain extent. I mean, right now we don't spend, because we know where we're going. We just, it's pure execution. We know the way. We don't spend that much time into it. But yes, definitely at the beginning, you have to play the game. You have to be into an incubator or an accelerator. We've also been part of Hacks, which is the
Yeah.
hardware accelerator of SOSV, where we spent 2 months in Shenzhen after our studies, and this was a great push.
Yeah.
So you kind of understand the dynamics between building a startup, what other people are doing, always asking advice,
Yep.
discussing together. Yes, I also advise people to do the small, competitions, startup competitions where you
Okay.
can win like 1,000 euros or 5,000 euros. That's great. You have to play the game and take these small victories, because at some point, even super early on, maybe a jury will have believed in you, and you need that small victories, especially if you build a product that takes a long time to develop and if the customer sales cycle time are long. Also, customers are super happy to work with a startup that has won like this competition or this competition. It's like free marketing. Why not?
Yeah. I loved what you said. Like, it's about those smaller wins and playing the game. And it's so important because I know for a lot of founders, it becomes a bit difficult. But I think what everyone needs to realize is if you have a startup, if you are into this ecosystem, you have to play the game, as you said. Like, you have to be part of it. You have to be able to do that. You gave already a lot of advice on how you did your journey, like went through your journey, fundraising, and so on. Is there something critical, that piece of advice that you would like to give to the founders with respect to building startups, with respect to fundraising, XYZ? It could be anything.
I would say something that I will always say is the customer comes first all
Okay.
the time. Even I would say even before the investors, because if you get money from someone, then the money from the customer is great.
Okay. So relentless focus on customers.
Mhm.
From an ecosystem perspective, do you think that maybe the ecosystem, the governments could be doing more for hard tech, deep tech kind of startups in general? Or do you think that it's sufficient, whatever it's being provided in terms of fundraising, the number of VCs who are attacking this, it could be more or XYZ? Do you think everything is fine, or do you think there's a room for improvement somewhere?
There's always room for improvement. People have been in the past year very biased on the SaaS model, right? Always finding some recurring source of revenues. And it
Mhm.
really depends on the industry you work in, right? You can't always apply that model. In the end, what you need to do is penetrate the market and sell as much as you can. And as you penetrate that market, you can build up and add services that will provide you some recurring source of income as a startup. I think it's about educating venture capitals, educating people in the ecosystem that you can have different types of business model depending on the market you work in.
Okay. Would you expect that the governments should be doing more, or do you think they are doing already pretty much in terms of grants and so on?
You can always do more. So in France, I mean, in terms of grants, I mean, you can always ask for more free money, of course, and it would be stupid not to ask for more, but it's already great. And I think it's important to
Okay.
not support startup too much, but also have a certain healthy balance between when if a startup fails, it's because the market didn't want their product. And that's really important to recognize that.
Mhm.
Failure is okay. We need to accept that and not just like, give free money to people who sometimes their product doesn't deserve to survive that long, at least without pivoting. And so I think there's a healthy balance to find. But in the end, they've put in place some really good structures. The Europe also put in place the EIC, which is a big grant and also some equity funding for startups that could really support Europe into R&D or deep tech technologies. That has been great. It's just about having the right selection criteria.
Okay. Awesome. It was great knowing all of this insights from you. I mean, in the end, I always ask this question. Have you read anything or maybe seen something interesting? It could be outside the startup ecosystem as well, that you would like to share with the audience.
Wow, read anything? There is one book I read. Well, there are two things. Well, there is one book I read that I read a while ago, which was about keeping on prospecting, right, and always moving forward and not backward, and always trying to reach out to new customers, build your knowledge within the accounts, and this relentless focus on always going the extra mile to meet the person you still haven't met because you don't know what you don't know, that has really stuck. So always trying to find the information, the answer, the context is
Okay.
something that I'm always trying to push for. And that's all because a book I read, which is a very famous sales book, but it's been really working for me.
Okay, so I missed the name of the book. What's the name of the book?
Fanatical Prospecting.
Okay, so
Jeff
we'll share the link of that as well with the audience. It's always good to share.
Yes, and I think it's a life lesson, really. It's always get out of your zone. That additional people that you're going to meet that is going to tell you that small information can unlock a lot of things. So you never know what you don't know.
Incremental knowledge, incremental gain. Amazing. Albane, thank you so much for sharing the insights about Inbolt, what you're building. Amazing and super fascinating. Best of luck for scaling your sales in the US and beyond. And thanks for sharing your journey on fundraising with other founders and ecosystem people, because it's always interesting on how you did it. Maybe there's some kind of inspiration which other people find within your journey. So thank you so much for joining in today.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks.